mom. It's heartbreaking.
The man accused of carrying out the deadly mass shooting faces 10 counts of first-degree murder.
Many in the media renewing calls for strict new gun control measures.
You are not a patriot because you think you have the right to own these types of weapons.
Never let a crisis go to waste. There was a prominent Democrat saying once, and that appears to be the case here.
A border town in Arizona declares a state of emergency due to the migrant surge, and the mayor there is blaming the Biden administration.
This is beyond what we are capable of doing. We literally have nothing here for them.
Congresswoman Miller Meeks won that race, and for the Democrats now to attempt to overturn that and steal it is as wrong could be.
And it further undermines people's faith and confidence in our election system.
Service workers at a Massachusetts college are forced to take anti-bias training after being falsely accused of racism.
The school owes more than just an apology. They should compensate some of these families.
We begin this Wednesday edition of Fox and Friends with the tragedy in Boulder. Police identifying the victims of the horrific shooting inside a grocery store.
It comes as we learn the suspect had a history with the law.
Jeff Paul is live in Boulder outside the store as memorials are being set up to honor the lives lost. And Jeff, that's something that you see all day now. People pull their car over, they stop for a moment, get out, bring an item, often flowers, to remember the people.
Yeah, that's absolutely what you're seeing out here. And despite this investigation still having a long way to go, you can see behind us just what people are doing when they come out here, really trying to show what this community is about. The fences that are meant to keep people sort of out are now becoming a makeshift tribute to the 10 lives lost. And they're really trying to remember people like Jody Waters, a mother of 2, and a grandmother, Denny Stong, who's just 20 years old and worked overnights at the grocery store. And then there's Eric Talley, a police officer with the Boulder Police Department, the first on scene, who basically headed towards the danger only to be killed trying to protect others.
We can never thank Officer Talley or his family enough for their sacrifice, but we will not forget it. Many are alive today because of the actions of Eric Talley and other first responders, and their bravery is a blessing to us all.
Now, the suspect in the shooting, 21-year-old Ahmad Alyssa, faces 10 counts of first-degree murder. According to the New York Times, his identity was reportedly known to the FBI because he was linked to someone else who was under investigation. His brother describes him as someone reportedly with mental health issues. That suspect is due in court tomorrow for his first appearance. Back to you.
All right, Jeff Paul live in Boulder. Jeff, thank you. All right, let's switch gears. We're going to talk to Joey Jones about what happened out there in a little bit. But first, the crisis on our southern border. Today, President Biden is set to meet with his immigration advisors as Mexico's president essentially blames Biden for the surge, which they will not call the surge. David Spunt joins us live from D.C., trying to keep track of all of it. David?
Yeah, good morning to you three. The president will also meet with his Health and Human Services Secretary, Javier Becerra, and his Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas, today to talk about this recent surge at the southern border over the past few months. The Pentagon made a big announcement yesterday announcing that 3 different sites would be used to house unaccompanied children. Specifically, it's going to be the Department of Health and Human Services put in a formal request to house those unaccompanied children at Joint Base San Antonio, Lackland Air Force Base, and Fort Bliss, all 3 in Texas. Now, the San Diego Convention Center will also be used to house the unaccompanied children. DHS officials using the Kay Bailey Hutchinson Center in Dallas to house these children. FEMA helping house the children, and ICE is putting up families in hotel rooms. But as you mentioned, Steve, the Mexican president, Manuel Lopez Obrador, says that President Biden is essentially causing the border surge. He said in a press conference, quote, expectations were created that with the government of President Biden, there would be a better treatment of migrants, and this has caused Central American migrants and also from our country wanting to cross the border, thinking that it is easier to do so. And Fox News' Griff Jenkins, a regular on this show, was first to report that in some cases, migrants are actually being released without any notice to appear, without any court dates at all. Right now, there are about 1.3 million immigration cases in a backlog, and that number continues to grow. Back to you.
All right, David, thank you very much.
So by better treatment, they mean we're going to let them go. And that's what's happening, by the way, in Gila Bend, Arizona. I interviewed the mayor of Gila Bend just a few minutes ago. And he says they're literally, this is a town of 2,000 people, halfway between the border and Phoenix. They have no resources. They're literally dropping them off in buses. I asked him if they gave them names, criminal history, any knowledge of whether they've taken COVID tests. He said no. Take a look at this. It's really quite remarkable.
Last night, I literally had to declare a state of emergency. This is beyond what we are capable of doing as a community of about 2,000 people. We just simply can't do it. We can't afford to continue to receive these people and then try to get them to places where they're going to be safe and protected. We literally have nothing here for them. We have no housing. We have very limited food, additional food and other resources. So I really don't understand why we were even selected for these drops.
You know, I can't help, Rachel, but come to the conclusion that for many of our politicians in Washington, D.C., or those in the elite media, corporate media environment, they think the American people are rubes. Because on one hand, you have Nancy Pelosi saying that this crisis is under control. As you pointed out, Steve, several times this morning, you have Jen Psaki and others in the Biden administration saying there is no crisis. You have the Washington Post writing stories saying, well, we've looked into the data, and this is a normal seasonal surge. On the other hand, you have mayors like the one you interviewed, Rachel, or Bruno Lozano down in Del Rio, who was on Fox and Friends First this morning. You have the words of the migrants themselves telling you why they're coming. We have the statistics that show us an increase in migrants crossing the border. And finally, we have, as you heard from David Spunt, the words of the Mexican president telling you why this is happening. But don't believe all of that. Don't believe your lying eyes. The Biden administration and their national media friends have told you it's no big deal. Yeah. You're a rube. Believe us, not all of that.
Well, and in the first hour, we talked a little bit about how in the op-ed pages of the Washington Post, to your point about corporate media, Will, the Washington Post has this op-ed with these three researchers from California who said, we've looked at the data and there is no surge, which, you know, I don't know what data they're looking at, but in the month of February, 100,000 people were apprehended at our southern border. And the year before, it was something like 35,000. So is 65,000 over 35,000 a surge? According to these experts, it is not. However, in the Washington, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday, and the news pages of, oh, and by the way, look at that right there. That's the chain link fence. Remember how Donald Trump got in so much trouble because he had kids in cages. Those are the same fences that Donald Trump had at those facilities with some sort of a green tarp over them. And yet, rather than there being a gigantic media outrage, they're giving Joe Biden a pass for the most part. And to my point I started to make, in the Washington Post yesterday, one of the reporters, a reporter, not an op-ed person, said that the conditions with Joe Biden's child detention center much more humane, which, you know, you look, a fence is a fence. Regardless of who the president is. But things are much different now because Joe Biden not only has kids sleeping on the floor, going to bed hungry at night, but he's got a global pandemic and he's got kids jammed in places at 700% capacity. Does that seem humane to you? It might not to you, but it does apparently to the Washington Post.
Well, Alejandro Mayorkas, said yesterday, I guess it was, he said, you know, the borders are closed. And yet here we just hear reports that they're opening up our military bases because they don't have the capacity for this. And I'll tell you what the real problem is. If you look at what the left is saying, people, human rights groups, the Southern Poverty Law Center, they're saying that it is inhumane, and the response that the Biden administration should take, and they're pressuring them right now, is to just release the children to whoever comes to get them, because don't keep them in detention camps. That's inhumane. The answer is not to send them back to their parents or their country of origin, but to give them to whoever comes to say that they are the family. This is insane, not compassionate, fuels child trafficking, fuels pedophilia, fuels all kinds of problems.
And you know what? You just made an excellent point, and that is because you interviewed the guy from Ela Bend, Arizona, who said it's a national, you know, he's declared a state of emergency because his town can't handle it. And then you've got the mayor, the people in Del Rio, Texas, saying they're dropping people off, no COVID tests. They can't handle it. You've got these mayors who are complaining, hey, federal government, stop dumping these people who we cannot take care of on our doorstep. So what's the federal government doing? They're shipping them off to military bases because Joe Biden is commander-in-chief. And so he's not going to hear complaints from the mayor of Fort Bliss or San Diego and places like that because he runs the military installations. So whatever he says, they're going to try to figure out how to get those kids there and to keep the bad headlines from impacting the administration.
Right.
Switching gears now, Congresswoman Mariannette Miller Meeks won her election to Congress from Iowa by 6 votes. Her election has been recounted several times and certified. She's sworn in. She's done the job for 2 to 3 months. But that has not stopped the Democratic leadership in Washington, D.C., not the American justice system, not the court system, but rather the Democratic leadership in Congress from challenging and possibly overturning her election. That has got 124 Republicans to challenge, to call what Nancy Pelosi and Democratic leadership is doing morally reprehensible. We spoke to Mariannette Miller Meeks just a few days ago about these challenges to her election. Listen to this.
I think it's obvious now that they skipped over the Iowa courts because they thought they would lose, and then they would take that losing petition to the Committee on House Administration. So it becomes a partisan political process, not an election process, and it disenfranchises Iowa voters, and it further undermines people's faith and confidence in our election system.
Imagine winning your election and then Nancy Pelosi takes it away from you. Here's what members of Congress...
She can do that?
Here's what members of Congress, they wrote a letter to Nancy and they said, we are astounded by your hypocrisy as the Speaker to support an investigation into this free and fair election while simultaneously claiming voter fraud does not exist nationally. The fact that you are willing to overturn an election for your own political expediency is astonishing, disheartening, and sickening. I tell you, I like that they wrote the letter. I can guarantee you if this was happening in the reverse, the Democrats wouldn't be writing letters. There would be protests. There's just something that's really frustrating, I think, to a lot of conservatives, which is the passivity with which the GOP, I think they think they're being more civil and they're trying to go by the rules. But it just feels like a lot is happening. First, they make them go through metal detectors, which is insulting to them and all of their constituents. And now this. I mean, this is truly a power grab.
Well, exactly right, because the state, to Will's point, the state of Iowa certified that the Republican won. But nonetheless, the Democrat...
I'm sorry, Stephen, when she was sworn in D.C. on January 3rd, nobody stood up to challenge it at that time either. So she's passed several different thresholds, Steve. So
to your point, Rachel, about it being a power grab, do you know who the attorney is for the losing Democrat? A fellow by the name of Mark Elias, who we have talked about a lot over the last couple of years. He was the guy that the Hillary Clinton campaign hired in 2016. He's the guy who hired Fusion GPS for the DNC in the Clinton campaign, and they, in turn, hired Christopher Steele, who created the Steele dossier, which led to the Russia collusion thing. This is the guy who is representing the Democrat loser who now wants it,
He sounds
wants
like a real
to throw it out.
upstanding
It's a
guy.
power grab, as you said.
Yeah.
But the big question is it going to happen? There have been 117 instances since 1933, 110 cases where campaigns have requested review. In 107 cases, rejected by Congress. But a couple, they were reversed. And so the Democrats pray this could be one of them. But will they let it happen? Stay tuned.
Or what will the Republicans do if it does? That'll be interesting, too. Well, anyway, we got to get to Jillian Neely, who's got more for us.
That's right. Good morning. Let's begin with this. The U.S. confirms North Korea fired at least one short-range missile over the weekend. It comes after the rogue regime warned the White House against joint military exercises with South Korea. It's the first weapons test since President Biden took office. Senior Biden administration officials seem to downplay the test, calling it, quote, normal activity. Well, keep you posted. Black Lives Matter activists rush a New York grocery store, trapping customers inside. Protesters chanting and demanding to be let in after employees locked the doors. The Rochester demonstration marks the one-year anniversary of Daniel Prude's death. He died of asphyxiation while in police custody. Officers involved were not charged. Senate Judiciary Committee Republicans are demanding a second hearing for President Biden's pick for Associate Attorney General. All 11 GOP committee members want Vanita Gupta to answer for, quote, misleading statements on several topics, including decriminalizing drugs and defunding police. They penned a letter to the committee chairman, writing in part, quote, our call for a second hearing is not due to Ms. Gupta's substantive views. It's about her lack of candor with the committee. And the boom of buying booze at the store appears to be dwindling down.
So, just to be clear, I'm a red wine drinker.
That's fine.
Okay, cool. I only drink red wine.
Okay.
A new report by Nielsen IQ says retail alcohol sales dropped nearly 2% the first week of March. Experts blame the decrease on the reopening of bars and restaurants across the U.S., but I can confirm I'm not a part of that because I have bought the same.
Well, tell us more, Jillian.
Oh, we know. I wonder if part of it, though, has to do with so many people gave up drinking for Lent, so that
maybe.
Be part of it.
Yeah, maybe.
Could be.
It also should be pointed out that alcohol sales were like at a record high for almost a year. So if they dropped 2%, hey, there might be some room to come down.
Right.
And that's the proof that it's going down.
I'll stay on top of this story for you guys.
Please.
Let you know all the developments.
More research.
Yeah, it's proof we're coming out of the pandemic. All right, well, President Biden and Democrats are rushing to push gun control after the tragedy in Boulder.
We can ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines in this country.
I've already committed to bringing universal background checks legislation to the floor of the Senate.
I'm going to try to bring a bill on gun safety and gun violence.
Second Amendment advocates like Joey Jones say this is just a gun grab. Joey joins us next.
I don't need to wait another minute, let alone an hour, to take common sense steps that will save the lives in the future and to urge my colleagues in the House and Senate to act. We can ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines in this country.
I've already committed to bringing universal background checks legislation to the floor of the Senate.
I'm going to try to bring a bill on gun safety and gun violence to the full committee for a debate.
Well, top Democrats are calling for more gun control laws in response to the mass shooting in Boulder, Colorado. As President Biden says he might take some sort of executive order action. It's an idea critics are calling a gun grab, including our next guest, Fox News contributor and retired Marine Corps bomb tech Joey Jones, who joins us from Georgia. Joey, good morning to you.
Good morning, Steve.
When stories like this come up, we like to get your point of view because you look at what they're considering in Washington and you wonder, you know, of those bills that they're talking about passing, which of those bills would have stopped what happened the other day?
Well, from the information I have right now today, and granted we don't know as much about Colorado as we do Georgia, none of those bills would have stopped what happened in the last week. From my understanding, what happened here in Georgia, a 9mm pistol that was configured to look like an AR was used, number one. And number two, what happened in Colorado, that was a lawful gun purchase from what I understand from a gun store where he probably had to, or if it was from a gun store, from what I understand it was, he had to pass a background check. And we already know through a few hours of investigative journalism that he had prior convictions that would be red flags. So we have a lot of questions on how was he able to pass that background check. And so H.R. 8 and H.R. 1446, I would encourage people to go read and gain an education on these issues, because don't be like Democratic lawmakers that stand in front of crowds and say stupid things because they don't understand what they want to ban to begin with. But neither of those bills would have prohibited what happened in the past week. As sad as that is, it's still true.
Well, and those are two House bills. It's unclear exactly when the Senate would consider it, but the Democrat-controlled Senate would need 10 Republicans to say, okay, let's go ahead and have the debate on this. There's no evidence right now that there are 10 Republicans who would go along with that. So there are some Democrats, Joey, who are saying, you know what? This is another reason to get rid of the filibuster, which we've heard the constant drumbeat. We need to get rid of the filibuster so that our 50-50 split with Kamala Harris breaking the tie, we can get some stuff done. And they're using this as another reason to get rid of the filibuster.
You know, H.R. 8 and H.R. 1446 focused on background checks, how they're administered, and when they have to be administered. One of them, H.R. 1446, is dubbed the Charleston loophole. And factually, that bill would not have prevented the Charleston shooting. And that tells you all you need to know when it comes to how these bills will be effective. It's not that I'm worried about more gun legislation or reform. If we can show and understand and more importantly believe that these things will curb deaths, my ears are all open. I'm not worried about gun grabs. I'm not worried about losing my Second Amendment. I'm worried about Congress focusing its efforts on appeasement and good talking points rather than legislation that may save lives. The greatest example I can give you is I remember growing up with Ted Kaczynski and Timothy McVeigh and Eric Rudolph terrorizing our country during an assault weapons ban. And we have gotten incredibly efficient at prohibiting those types of mass murders, not because explosives are less accessible. You can buy explosives in an Academy sporting goods store today, but because we invested in federal law enforcement agencies and, more importantly, their ability to communicate to prevent these things from happening. We need preventative measures, not just prohibitive measures that will not work. So the last thing I'll say is we have more people filling out background checks today than we ever have, and that's a 3 or 4 year trend. That's not going away. If Joe Biden wants to fix this through executive action, invest in resources to vet these background checks that we already do and do it effectively and have quick follow-up. What happened in Charleston could have been prevented. The FBI has already admitted they just forgot to process it. It was left sitting on someone's desk. So how are you going to do more background checks when you're allowing the ones that you're supposed to do now to not happen and tragedies to happen?
It is so frustrating. I know you're busy during the day. You probably weren't watching The View. Here's one of their co-hosts who said something regarding something you just touched on. Listen to Sunny Hostin.
I don't think we can any longer equate freedom with the unfettered right to own assault rifles. I feel like a hostage right now. I feel like a hostage to the selfish people that insist on owning these types of weapons. That is not freedom in this country. You are not a patriot because you think you have the right to own these types of weapons.
Joey, what do you say to Sunny Hostin?
You know, just because a pretty talking head says it doesn't make it true. I'm sure she's a fantastic, smart, intelligent person, but she's 100% absolutely wrong on this. And she can take her hate and her ignorance out to the street and scream if she wants to. I'll take my freedom and my patriotism on my hip to the shooting range and hunting so that I can be a sheepdog to protect those around me like I am. I'm offended by what she said, but that's okay. I don't hate her for it. I just hope she educates herself and she shakes the cloak of ignorance and looks at actual factual information rather than just a talking point that may get her praise on The View and criticism on Fox. That's all this is. It's rhetoric. It's not common sense. It's not intelligent. It's not factual. It's a way to incite people or to gain praise and love. And unfortunately, that's what human beings are operating off of right now rather than objective truths and hard decisions. I'm all about legislation that may make this world a safer place, but I'm not all about legislation that's very hard to reverse that would make law-abiding citizens less safe.
Joey Jones, sir, thank you very much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Meanwhile,
Needles. It's a shame. It's a shame.
Good morning to you and welcome back. We have some headlines now. A convicted Virginia murderer and sex offender is set to walk free next week. Gregory Joyner has served 32 years of his life sentence over the killing and attempted rape of a 15-year-old girl when he was 17. The decision for early release was made by a new parole board appointed by Virginia's Democratic governor. The leader of LA's Black Lives Matter chapter pledges to stand in solidarity with the county's progressive district attorney during a virtual town hall. Melina Abdullah saying in part, quote, "We have decided we are going to stand with George. We are standing with you and we have your back." But a mother joined Fox and Friends First earlier, saying she contacted Black Lives Matter about the murder of her son, and she says they did nothing.
Black Lives Matter is a multi-million-dollar business. It's not about Black lives. It's about anybody Black that gets murdered by a cop, and it can generate big bucks for them.
The mother speaking out after the DA's office released one of her son's convicted killers on parole. The Colorado baker who won a partial Supreme Court victory after refusing to bake a wedding cake for a same-sex couple is sued again. Jack Phillips is refusing to bake a birthday cake designed to honor a customer's gender transition. He's being sued for discrimination, but Phillips says he disagrees with the cake's message. His trial is underway. Let's look at your headlines. Send it back to you.
Thanks, Jillian.
Thank you, Jillian.
Meanwhile, this viral video giving the nation a shocking look at what life is like in one Philadelphia neighborhood, which has now been referred to as the new Skid Row.
This is in Kensington, and it's located in North Philly.
Fox News analyst Lawrence Jones saw the city's worsening drug crisis firsthand, and he joins us now. What'd you see, Lawrence? Good morning.
Good morning, guys. In 2019, Philadelphia numbers of overdose deaths were 3 times higher than its murder rate, and more than 80% of those overdoses were due to opioids. The neighborhood that you guys are talking about is just 4 miles away from where the Declaration of Independence was signed, but it couldn't be more different. Take a look.
Philadelphia County has the highest overdose rate of any of the 10 most populous counties in America. And in 2019, the highest number of overdoses were right here in Kensington. So describe, what do you see when you come down here?
Drug infestation, needles. It's a shame. It's a shame.
It's like you're afraid to walk in the, past them to get in the building because they're holding needles and they're falling over.
What type of drugs?
Anything you want. Heroin, cocaine.
I've been to most of all the major cities that are being impacted by this drug crisis, this homeless crisis, and I've never seen anything like this in my life. Needles everywhere, capsules everywhere, people picking up needles to reuse, fires, fights. It is truly a crisis, and the sad part about all of this is not just at night. This is in broad daylight. People shooting up in broad daylight while children and families are walking the street. This is what they see.
Can't be safe down here, especially for the kids. You can't. Your children can't even walk down here. The park is called Needle Park.
Kids are kids. They're gonna be curious. They're gonna ask. So, just explaining that what it is that these people are doing or why the guy is leaning the way he's leaning. I mean, it's tough.
This would be considered the epicenter of this area. All type of criminal activity that is here every single night. They get shot up with drugs, they have a good time, and then in the morning it is left here for cleanup crews to get all the rest of this up. You think this climate is destroying business?
Yes. Yes. Very much so.
What is city council doing? The mayor? What are they doing?
It's a shame to say, nothing.
So tell me, who's out here? Is it people from Philly or are they from all over?
It's a mix. People come from all over. Out west, down south, north. It's just,
Why do you think they come to Philly?
It's an open air drug market, And there's not too many more of them like that in this country. So, I mean, if you want an open air drug market and you want to be able to readily have it, you come to Philadelphia.
This is a city that is being impacted like no other. This is just a little bit of it. What do you see?
Just the age, like the age group of the guys that are out there getting high is like drastically dropping. Like, yeah, I'll tell you, I'll go home in tears.
You don't think there's anything we could do to help the situation?
Down here? No. You could slow it up. You'll never stop it.
Tragic story, guys. We reached out to the Philadelphia Police Department and the DEA, but they declined to comment. However, the mayor's office, this is what they said. The COVID-19 pandemic has prompted a large spike in opioid overdoses nationally. Kensington is the area of Philadelphia that has been hit the hardest. In the wake of this, the city of Philadelphia has established an opioid response unit to address these concerns. These combined efforts have allowed us to make significant changes in the way we serve our most vulnerable residents.
Lawrence, he says they've got an opioid unit. You just shot that, what, yesterday or the day before? Where was the opioid unit that day?
Yeah, it's sad, guys. They shoot up in the middle of the night in broad daylight, and then the cleanup crews come out every single morning to clean up all these needles. Guys, I've been to Skid Row, I've been to San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, and I've never seen anything such a crisis. Young people, I mean, the amount of young men that were out there shooting up, young women shooting up drugs in broad daylight is devastating.
Hey, Lawrence, geographically, how big is this area in Philadelphia? Is this one street where you go a block or two over and it's a normal commercial district, or is it a growing, expanding area that seems to have no drug enforcement?
It keeps expanding, and as you know, when you talk to local cops and our sources within the police department, they say, look, we've been told to be hands off. Don't do anything about this. Just make sure that people aren't fighting or anything like that. But they openly just let them shoot up drugs because they don't want the pushback from the mayor's office.
Well, he said the opioid crisis is getting worse because of the pandemic. What a terrible time to open our borders and let more drugs come in. And also, as we're putting people who come here illegally into military camps, bases, I mean, we're seeing homeless on the street here who could use some, drug rehabilitation and a place to sleep. It just seems like such a mismatch of priorities.
Yeah, we have our own crisis here at home. For a movement and a party that says that they are for the people and they have so much compassion to allow this to happen on the street from a human standpoint, to distribute needles to these people, to watch families have to go and walk over people can't even walk their dogs in this community because you will step on a needle.
I will say,
pretty tragic.
It reminds me, I don't know who's seen The Wire, but it reminds me of the season where essentially they implemented an area of town in Baltimore called Amsterdam, which became a drug legalized effort. They just didn't enforce it, and that's exactly what your report reminds me of right there.
If the city is giving out the needles, what's that message? Yeah, this is okay with us.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. All right, Lawrence, great job.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Lawrence.
All right, California Democrats want President Biden to take on climate change by convincing him to ban gas-powered vehicles. Ban gas-powered vehicles. We'll tell you about it next.
Why? It boggles my mind. How dare you? The canceled tornado is always looking for its next victim. Mr. Potato Head is now dropping the Mister like a hot potato. Vamoose for Dr. Seuss. Who gets appalled at a furry little doll? Nothing makes the woke-ademics feel more alive than canceling a guy who's been dead for 400 years.
Greg's Canceling Cancel Culture. Gutfeld, premiering April 5th on Fox News Channel. America is watching.
Left-wing voices on Twitter wasted absolutely no time presuming the race of the Boulder shooting suspect, wrongly declaring him a, quote, white man before he was identified as Ahmad Alissa, who is of Syrian descent. Liberal activist Amy Siskin tweeted, "Religion and name do not determine skin color. There are Muslims who have black, brown, and white skin. This shooter's skin is white." That was after she tweeted first that the shooter was white. She wasn't alone. Many, many left-wing activists and media members made that presumption before we knew a single detail. Here to react, the author of Woke Inc., Vivek Ramaswamy. Vivek, great to see you. I really don't have time to scroll through all of the tweets yesterday of the activists and media members who presumed the shooter to be white and then jumped off on their preferred narrative of this shooting being yet another example of white supremacy. Why is this happening, Vivek?
We live in a race-obsessed moment. Look, murder is wrong, irrespective of the race of the perpetrator, irrespective of the race of the victim. That's the most important thing here. Actually, let's remember, just last week, Robert Long, a white shooter, killed 8 people in Atlanta. It was a tragedy. 6 of them were Asian, and everyone assumed that it was racism and that race was his motivator, even though we don't really know, and there's no evidence that emerged since then that racism was at play. We don't know. We should let it go to trial and let the facts bear themselves out. And yet, just this week, now someone in Boulder, who is not a white man, a Middle Eastern man, shot 10 people, and as best I know, all 10 of them are white, and there isn't a peep about racism. And again, I do not think that we know a thing about this shooter's motive. We should let the facts declare themselves out in court. But the difference between those two situations and the apparent hypocrisy there, the silence is really deafening this week compared to what the public narrative was last week. And I think that bears notice and ought to cause us to reflect on whether we should impute motives when, in fact, we should be better served by letting the facts declare themselves.
What a novel and controversial point of view, Vivek. We might want to wait and let the facts come out before we presume motives, even the race of a suspected shooter. But again, that doesn't stop the really flood of voices who would do the opposite. I'm just going to share one more. I said I didn't have time to read them all, but I will share one more. This is Kamala Harris's niece, Mina Harris. She tweeted the following in a tweet that, by the way, has now since been deleted. The Atlanta shooting was not even a week ago. Violent white men are the greatest terrorist threat to our country. So even though we know the prudent, responsible thing is to wait until we know the details, for the motive or the race of the shooter, we see so many who refuse to do that. I want to move on, though, Vivek, and I want to ask you about an op-ed by Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. He wrote the following. It's the headline in the Washington Post. Let's set the record straight on woke supremacy and racism. Inside that op-ed, he said the following. My ideology does not match that which they prescribe based upon my complexion. That is woke supremacy. It is the tolerant left's intolerance for dissent. It is a progressive conception of diversity that does not include a diversity of thought. It is discrimination falsely marketed as inclusion. What strong words, Vivek. Clearly, Tim Scott's unwilling to toe the line of what he is supposed to think based upon his skin color, and that type of thought diversity won't be tolerated.
I think he is right about that. And actually, over in the other chamber of Congress, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley summed it up very neatly a couple of years ago when she said that we don't want any more brown faces that don't want to be a brown voice. We don't want any more black faces that don't want to be a black voice. And what that means is that we're conflating someone's skin color with what they are supposed to think. And that's what both wokeism and classical racism share in common. They reject the fundamental idea that we ought to judge you not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character. Except one of those we publicly denounced today, as we ought to, white supremacy and racism. And one of those has infiltrated every major institution in America, from philanthropic institutions to universities to companies. And so the only thing that I disagree with Senator Tim Scott was walking back his original statement in the Washington Post, because it's not that wokeism is worse inherently than white supremacy. Of course it's not. It's that wokeism is more prevalent in infecting every one of our institutions today, and that's a bigger problem.
And supremacy is supremacy. We're either going to judge each other as individuals or we are not. Now, from one form of radicalism to another, Vivek, I want to ask you about this. This is a tweet from Alex Padilla, California Democrat, who is calling on the Joe Biden administration to essentially ban gas-powered vehicles. He tweeted the following. Senator Feinstein and I are calling on the Biden administration to follow the lead of California and set a date by which all new cars and passenger trucks be sold zero-emission vehicles. We have the technology to make this necessary transition now. Wow. So essentially set a date by which there will be no more gas-powered vehicles, Vivek.
So first of all, I have a major issue with the process here. If you really want to increase consumer cost for everyday Americans and reduce consumer choice, then do it through the front door by passing a law through Congress, going through both chambers, and then having the White House sign it, rather than calling on the president to do it with the stroke of the pen via executive order. That'd be unconstitutional, in my opinion. But I also think that even if you are a responsible lawmaker, let's just take where we are this week. Last week, there was an Alaska summit with China. If these are such important issues, we ought to sign up to them if and only if the rest of the world, including China, are willing to sign up to similar mandates, because otherwise we would be the only ones bearing a particular course of action to save, allegedly, the planet, when in fact the rest of the world isn't coming along. So there's a lot wrong with this, but the executive order point is, I think, the top of the list. We cannot be issuing fiats without going through the proper process.
I'm just sitting here writing, Vivek, because I've had trouble keeping up over the past 12 months, everything we need to ban. Guns, gas-powered vehicles, eating in a restaurant, disagreeable thoughts. You got to get rid of all of this stuff, Vivek. We always love talking to you. Very, very smart. We appreciate your time. 12 states' attorneys generals are accusing President Biden of overstepping his authority with his climate change executive order. Missouri is leading the way in the lawsuit, and their attorney general is next.
Not everybody wants.
We have been telling you about what's been going on down in Miami. Well, listen to this. A Pennsylvania woman was found dead inside a South Florida hotel room. Officials say she was drugged and sexually assaulted by two men on spring break. Carly Shimkins joins us more with the investigation that is going on right now down in Miami. Carly?
Yeah, Steve, that's right. And those two men from North Carolina arrested and accused of drugging and raping a woman who later died at a Miami Beach hotel. 21-year-old Avory Collier and 24-year-old Dorian Taylor are also being accused of stealing the victim's credit cards and cash. According to arrest records, surveillance footage shows the men entering the Albion Hotel with victim Christine Engelhart. About a half hour later, they are seen exiting the hotel alone. The men face an array of charges, including burglary, petty theft, and sexual battery. Investigators also trying to determine the cause of death and if it's linked to a green pill the men gave her. If that's proven to be the case, they could face murder charges as well. Now, this horrifying situation comes as Miami Beach is under an 8 p.m. curfew to try and control